There is a country where ancient ruins sit untouched for thousands of years, not because nobody wants to study them, but because the government has made it nearly impossible to go near them. A country with one of the oldest civilizations on the planet, sitting on top of some of the largest oil reserves in the world, and almost completely cut off from the outside. Today, we're looking at why Iran is considered one of the most dangerous and misunderstood countries on Earth, and what's actually hidden inside its borders. Iran doesn't get much coverage in Western media beyond politics and conflict, but underneath the headlines is a country with an extraordinary history, strange restrictions, and places that very few outsiders have ever seen. In the next few minutes, we're going to cover the real reasons behind Iran's reputation, the ancient sites most people don't know exist, and the parts of the country that remain almost completely closed off. Most people associate the world's oldest civilizations with Egypt or Mesopotamia, but Iran, known for most of history as Persia, was home to one of the largest empires the ancient world ever saw. At its peak around 500 BC, the Persian Empire stretched from Egypt to India, covering roughly 8 million square kilometers and ruling over an estimated 44% of the world's population at the time. No empire before it had ever controlled that much territory or that many people. The ruins of Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of this empire, still stand today in southern Iran. Massive stone columns, carved reliefs of soldiers and tribute bearers from across the empire, and gates that once led into one of the most powerful palaces on Earth. Persepolis is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and yet, because of how difficult it is for foreigners to obtain visas to Iran, and how restricted travel within the country can be, very few people outside Iran have ever actually walked through it. Since 1979, Iran has operated under a system where the government maintains tight control over who enters the country and what they're allowed to see and do once inside. Citizens of the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada face some of the strictest requirements. In most cases, they cannot travel independently. They must be accompanied by a government-approved guide for the entire duration of their trip. Certain areas are completely off-limits to foreign visitors, particularly near the borders with Afghanistan and Pakistan, where the government cites security concerns related to smuggling and militant activity. Photography is heavily restricted in many areas. Government buildings, military installations, and even some bridges and infrastructure cannot be photographed, and tourists have been detained for taking pictures without realizing they were in a restricted zone. There have also been multiple documented cases of foreign nationals, including dual citizens and journalists, being detained for extended periods on charges that human rights organizations have described as vague or unsubstantiated. The State Department currently advises against all travel to Iran for U.S. citizens, citing the risk of arbitrary arrest and detention. In the southeast of Iran lies the Lutdesert, and it holds a record that surprises most people. In 2005, satellite measurements recorded a surface temperature of 70.7 degrees Celsius in the Lutdesert. That's the highest surface temperature ever recorded anywhere on Earth. The region is so hot and so dry that it's considered one of the most lifeless places on the planet. No permanent human settlements exist within large sections of it. Even short-term exposure without proper preparation can be fatal. But within this desert are also some of the strangest natural formations on Earth, massive wind-carved ridges called calottes, some over 100 meters tall, stretching for dozens of kilometers in formations that look almost artificial from above. Very few researchers have conducted extensive fieldwork here, simply because the conditions make sustained work nearly impossible for most of the year. In northwestern Iran, there's a village called Kandavan, where people have lived inside cone-shaped rock formations for an estimated 700 years. These aren't caves carved by humans from scratch. They're naturally formed volcanic rock cones that locals hollowed out and adapted into multi-story homes, some of which are still inhabited today. The formations were created by volcanic ash from nearby Mount Sahand, which hardened over thousands of years into a soft rock that's relatively easy to carve but durable enough to maintain its shape. What makes Kandavan unusual is that it's one of only a handful of inhabited rock cone villages left in the world, and one of the very few that tourists are actually permitted to visit, though access to certain areas remains restricted. Iran's nuclear program is one of the most heavily monitored and most secretive programs in the world. Facilities like the one at Fordo are built inside mountains, buried under layers of rock specifically to make them resistant to airstrikes. The International Atomic Energy Agency has conducted inspections at various sites, but access has frequently been a point of diplomatic conflict, with Iran restricting inspector access to certain facilities at different points over the years. Satellite imagery has been one of the primary ways the outside world tracks activity at these sites, since on-the-ground access is so limited. These facilities sit in remote desert and mountain regions, areas that are already difficult to reach, made even more inaccessible by military security perimeters that extend for kilometers around them. Iran sits on multiple major fault lines, and earthquakes have destroyed cities here repeatedly throughout history. But the ancient city of Yazd has survived for over 1,000 years, largely thanks to an extraordinary ancient engineering system called qanats, underground channels that transport water for kilometers from mountain aquifers to the city, some of which are still functioning today after more than 2,000 years. Yazd is also home to wind-catcher towers called bajirs, tall structures designed centuries ago to channel wind down into buildings, naturally cooling them in a region where summer temperatures regularly exceed 40 degrees Celsius, all without any electricity. The engineering is so effective that some of these systems are still in use today, in a city that predates most of the structures we consider ancient in the Western world. Iran is a country of contradictions, one of the oldest and most sophisticated civilizations in human history, combined with some of the strictest travel restrictions on Earth today. Ancient cities still standing after thousands of years, deserts hot enough to kill within hours, villages carved into volcanic rock, and facilities buried so deep inside mountains that satellites are sometimes the only way to know what's happening there. Most of what's inside Iran's borders remains unseen by the outside world, not because it doesn't exist, but because almost no one is allowed to look. If this was interesting, subscribe. Next time we're heading somewhere just as restricted and just as misunderstood.